Hi everyone, this is the video about federalism, which you're supposed to watch before you come to class on Tuesday, September 30th. Feel free to watch this as many times as you need, pause it, and if you have, as you take notes, if you have any questions, come into class with them on Tuesday the 30th so that we can discuss it, because when we do these videos at home, I don't want you to not ask questions. So write down whatever questions you have and we'll discuss it when you come to class. As we talked about before we went to DC, the United States has many different levels of government. So mostly in this class we focus on the federal government, which is the national government located in Washington, D.C. But we're also a citizen of a whole bunch of other governments, including the state of Ohio, whatever city you live in, the county you live in, and a couple of others. So just to be clear before we get started, federalism deals with how these levels of government interact, so it's important to know that we have these different levels of government. And today we're going to talk more and more about what they do. If you look at our Constitution, there are certain powers, certain jobs, certain responsibilities that are given to the national government. I want you to think about that for a second, because this idea that certain powers are given to the national government, we might say are delegated to the national government, means that they're given by something or someone to the national government. And if you remember, the group that gives them to the national government are the states, because in our Constitution, even though our current Constitution has a more strong central government than under the Articles of Confederation, the states are still the ones that are the sort of the foundation of the government. And certain jobs are given to the national government by the states because they're just done better at a national level. This is an important thing to remember, because oftentimes people think, well, the national government's for the whole country, thus it does the more important jobs. Actually, that's not true. The jobs given to the national government were given to it by the state governments when they wrote the Constitution. And they were given because the national government would be better at those specific jobs. So delegated powers are the powers given to the national government. And then this next slide looks at some of the examples of the delegated powers. We've talked about many of these before. The national government has the right to declare war, to have a foreign policy in terms of relationships between the United States and other countries. We have federal money. So our money says United States of America, not State of Ohio on it. The federal government runs the post office. The federal government sets weights and measures, which doesn't really sound like it would be that important, but if different states thought a pound was a different amount of weight, or different states thought that a foot was a different length of measure, we'd have a lot of chaos when we try to trade things. Any trade between states is able to be regulated by the national government. The national government has the ability to regulate immigration. So in the Constitution, it is written specifically that there are 10 or 12 jobs that are specifically given to the national government. Okay, and you'll notice that some of those are obvious. You would have thought of those, but they're not really that big, right? I guess foreign policy and declaring war is a big job, but it does. There are a lot of things that the federal government does today in 2014 that aren't specifically one of these bullet points. And the reason for that is the last of the delegated powers. If you read Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that the federal government has the ability to do all of those delegated powers that are listed on the previous slide, and, quote, to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying out the delegated powers. All right. Think about that again. The federal government has the ability to do anything that is necessary to carry out a delegated power, and anything that is proper to carry out a delegated power. The question is, what does that mean? And people have debated about what this means for a very long time. Scholars of the Constitution have debated about it, but the way that it's currently interpreted is that things that you would have to do in order to carry out a delegated power are constitutional for our federal government to do. So, for example, it doesn't say in the Constitution that the post office can print stamps, but it's necessary to have stamps in order to have a post office. Thus, it would be completely constitutional for the federal government to make stamps. It doesn't say that the federal government, it doesn't say specifically in the Constitution that the federal government has the ability to buy up land to have post offices on in every town and city in the United States, but they have, right? The post office owns more land than any other group in the United States of America, right? But because it's deemed that that is necessary and proper for running the post office, which is a delegated power, this necessary and proper clause gives the federal government the ability to do that. And to go back for 1 second, another term for this necessary and proper clause is the elastic clause. Elastic, if you think about the elastic on a pair of athletic shorts, it's something that stretches and grows. And this power under the necessary and proper clause is something that has grown and stretched throughout time. If the federal government wants to take on a responsibility that isn't listed in those delegated powers in the Constitution, oftentimes Congress or the president will say, well, this job is necessary and proper for carrying out one of the things we are required to do. Thus, over time, the national government has seen the things that it's responsible for grow because it uses this necessary and proper clause or the elastic clause to justify it. This is probably the most confusing point in this PowerPoint, so it'll definitely be something that we talk about during class, but if you have questions about it, make sure you come in. There's another key part of the Constitution with regards to this question of what are the states' responsibilities and what are the delegated powers to the federal government. The 10th Amendment, which was the last amendment in the Bill of Rights, to quote it directly, it says, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or the people." The reserved is the key word there. Remember, power in the United States automatically starts with the states. If we don't give it to the national government as a delegated power, it's just assumed that it belongs to the states. Thus, the term reserved powers are all of the powers that belong to the states in the United States of America. So reserved powers are the opposite of delegated powers, would be another way to think about this. There are a huge variety of places that states make laws that affect our daily life. For example, laws about marriage. This has been very controversial lately, as we have some states that allow homosexuals to get married and other states that do not. Different states have laws about divorce, and if someone is getting divorced, how that would work. Different states have laws about public safety. So some things that are crimes in one state are not crimes in another. We have 2 states in the United States that have legalized the possession of marijuana, for instance. Other states have different punishments for crimes. So murder is illegal in every state, but the way that murder is punished in terms of could you get the death penalty, the number of years in prison, that's different depending on what state you're in. States have the power to set up local governments, which we're not doing a lot of anymore, but when Ohio was founded, we need to sort of divide up all the territory into towns and cities. That was an important job. States run public schools, probably the number one thing they spend money on. States regulate businesses within their state. And there's a huge variety of other topics. But remember, the key thing here is that the assumption is if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, and it can't be sort of necessary and proper for carrying out a delegated power, it's automatically something that the states should be responsible for. And there are a number of other areas that would fall under state power under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. There are also powers that are shared powers. So there are some things that all levels of government do, and their jurisdictions are somewhat overlapping. Okay, so for example, you pay taxes to every level of government because the tax money is necessary to fund those levels. So you pay local taxes, you pay state taxes, you pay federal taxes. We have courts at every level of government as well, because there are certain laws that you break that would be local, like a speeding ticket, something like that. A ticket for putting your garbage out too early or not mowing your lawn. Those would be local issues that would go before a local court. We also have state courts. Most laws are state laws in the United States. So if you commit robbery, murder, rape, any sort of what we would consider violent crimes, almost always those are state crimes and not federal crimes. And then there are obviously national courts too that would evaluate issues like terrorism, bankruptcy. They would deal with civil rights violations. Those would be some of the topics covered by a national court. But it's important to know that it's not that there are just one kind of court in the U.S. They all enforce the different laws that each level of government has. We have police forces at each level of government as well. So the city you live in has a police force. You're probably, you recognize that Shaker Heights Police Department, Cleveland Police Department. There's also state police, and there's also national police, like the FBI would be the classic example of that. All levels of government also provide for the public welfare. So we have local parks, we have state parks, we have federal parks. There are a lot of other ways that this idea of public welfare ties in, and every level of government is responsible for it. But I think you're getting the idea of how there are certain things that all the levels of government share. Now, sometimes states decide that it's better to give some of their power to the local governments. So they would delegate some responsibilities to local governments. So you can see through the cartoon here that things like snow plowing, trash collection, running rec centers, repairing certain local roads, those would be things that are better done at a local level because you're more responsive to the people who run the city are more responsive to those that live in it than if you had to go to Columbus to get those issues done with. So this is an example of, again, where the assumption is the power lies with the states and they give it to the local government if they think it can be done at the lower level better. So the last thing for you to think about then is this idea of federalism. The term federalism is the balance of power between the federal government and the state and local governments. In the United States, the Constitution lays out what the balance should be. What powers are delegated, what powers are reserved. And thus, a big part of what our government is doing is trying to maintain that balance. If our national government took too much responsibility from the states, we would be in violation of the Constitution, and there would be some problems for the way that the United States would function. Just like if there was too much power for the states and not enough power for the national government, we would also have a problem and be in violation of this idea of federalism. So federalism is this very important balance of power, and not every country, not every democracy has this, but for countries like the United States with the different levels of government, federalism is a really key idea. And it's something that you should definitely know what it means and what the definition is, and understand this idea of why certain things are delegated to the national government and certain things are reserved to the state and local governments.